So here we are at the 30th episode of The Simpsons and Me, a video series that I literally just did as an experiment following in the footsteps of one of my favorite YouTubers, The Real Gyms, that just so happened to end up being one of my most consistently successful ventures in YouTube video production. And to commemorate this milestone 30th episode, I made the idiot mistake of doing a poll and putting an episode on said poll that I didn't really have much interest in doing. And yeah, it's completely my fault for making this episode an option. I was low-key hoping that Homer Defined or the Itchy and Scratchy movie would win, but I made my bed and now I have to find a way to weasel out of it. Alright, well, Bart After Dark is a Season 8 episode, and I've gone over my opinions on Season 8, that I think the season is overrated. Like, go watch one of my other videos, I think I mentioned my whole thought process on that. But I think Bart After Dark is one of those episodes that kind of epitomizes why I don't like Season 8 that much. It's a very gimmicky episode. It's an episode that tries to push some sort of envelope, but the whole thing just stinks of standards and practices and dampens the overall message that it's trying to push. The opening plot concerns Lisa begging Marge to drive her out to some beach where there was an Exxon Valdez-esque oil spill in order to help animals, which is a simple enough opening plot. I always found the little bit with Lisa in the peach tree to be pretty funny, like funnier than I should have found it.
Oh, alright, we'll go.
And then the fact that when they get there, the whole thing is reserved for celebrities looking for clout, and all they end up cleaning is rocks.
I've got rocks that need washing at home.
And the big deal breaker is the really lame after party that they're offered.
Okay, scrub up and head for the communal tarp. We're having kelp burgers, and we're going to watch a tape of Johnny Arvik. He's the Eskimo comedian.
It's pretty funny how hippies are portrayed in The Simpsons, because they're either portrayed as like these saints that are well-meaning and want the best for the environment and whatnot, or they're portrayed as completely out-of-touch losers that nobody wants to associate with. And I was actually going to make a whole thing about like the Gen X writers versus the Boomer writers, how they portray certain things differently. But the funny thing about that is this episode was written by Richard Appel, who was not only born in 1963, so he's like the tail end of the Boomer generation, but he also wrote Mother Simpson, which is like the biggest hippie dick ride fest in the series, which I'm gonna get to that episode when I get to it. But it does make me laugh that Lisa, who's Miss New Age, like environmental, spiritual person, just runs for the hills at the promises of kelp burgers and Eskimo comedians. Even she's like, man, fuck this shit. But the real meat of this opening story is Homer and Bart being left alone, which is a recipe for great TV moments.
Keep the window open.
Cat in the furnace.
I think I'll take Maggie with us.
The house becomes a total wreck in the presence of two guys, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't do a garbage angel when I worked in sanitation. But as soon as it starts really getting good, the opening plot wraps itself up pretty quickly when Bart goes out with his friends and Milhouse's remote control plane ends up stuck on the roof of a strange and scary looking house. There's a bit of fun to be had in Bart's outing. Like, I quote the Mr. Burns line about there being way too many fat children a lot and always have. When I was a kid at the CNE, the Canadian National Exhibition, I remember my dad asking if I was having fun, and I looked directly at this fat kid and said, "There's too many fat children here." I was a little shit as a kid. But after all the fun is done, we get to the main plot. For this house that the remote control plane is stuck on isn't the home of a witch or a Frankenstein, nor is it the home where
They take the brains out of zombies and put them in the heads of other zombies to create a race of super zombies.
it is in fact something entirely different. Bart gets snatched up after falling off the roof and wrecking a very expensive stone gargoyle, and then Homer orders him to do chores for the lady to make up for it, and it turns out that this house is a, quote, burlesque house. So here's the thing, I googled a burlesque house to see if like that's a thing or if it was ever a thing, and most of what I found was just links to stuff relating to this episode and like a few venues that do burlesque but wouldn't really qualify as a burlesque house, which has led me to the conclusion that there is in fact no such thing as a burlesque house. It got me thinking that at some point in development the burlesque house was intended to be a brothel, but standards and practices likely slammed their foot split down at the prospect of a 10-year-old boy working at a brothel. I really need to start watching these episodes with commentary tracks when I do videos on them. I need to know if this is in fact the case. But from my perspective, it seems like they altered it, toned it down, and turned it into a burlesque house. The problem is, the people in Springfield treat it as if it is a brothel, because a burlesque house in concept would be a much tamer version of like a strip club, which is something they have in Springfield. Bart ends up working there for a while, befriending Belle, but then he starts seeing people from around town who recognize him, such as Grandpa. And what really blows the lid on the whole thing is when he sees Skinner, who is really weird about one of the workers there. It borders on stalking, before he realizes that he is in fact talking to Bart. After which, he rats out Homer to the town's religious crowd.
Principal Skinner saw him with his own eyes.
That's true, but I was only in there to get directions on how to get away from there.
Which of course has a kind of domino effect that leads to Marge finding out,
well, if Homer Simpson wants his 10-year-old son working in a burlesque house, then Homer Simpson's 10-year-old son is going to work in a burlesque house. That's...
and then there's this huge moral crackdown on the burlesque house in which many citizens of Springfield are exposed for going there, including a very early indication that Patty is a lesbian. I will say though, the part with Barney pretty much gets a laugh out of me every time I see it.
Oh, Barney.
And they also do wig him twice. The problem here is, yeah, it's kind of shady that these guys, most of which are married or in relationships, would be going to a burlesque house, but like I said, burlesque is a tamer version of stripping. Legitimate burlesque really doesn't have any nudity involved, and the venue itself seems to have like live theater, comedy, games, and drinks, so it seems more in line with like a gentleman's club than anything. And I find it funny that if in fact they did have to tone it down from being a brothel, they have this funny little exchange between Jasper and Grandpa.
Are they talking about the bordello?
No, the burlesque house. So just keep your mouth shut.
It's kind of a mess how it just jumps to like Marge trying to step up and be a moral compass in all of this. But it is really funny when she tries to pressure Belle, the owner, to leave, and Belle just counters pretty much every point Marge makes, and then Marge gets mad.
I've lived in this town for 37 years.
I've lived here 52 years.
I'm third generation.
Sixth.
Get out of my town!
The clear message of this episode is satirizing moral panic. Sure, the wives have the right to be mad that their husbands are going to the burlesque house, but from a legal standpoint, there's no real illegal activity going on in the burlesque house, or la maison derrière, as it's called. The only real arguable illegal activity that might be going on in there is like the gambling. There are some implications that there might be more than just burlesque going on in there, but it's played so close to the chest that I wouldn't be shocked if I was just misinterpreting it. So in the climax, the town forms a mob and goes to destroy the burlesque house, but Homer convinces them not to through a song, and it's a pretty catchy song, I won't lie. And it's such a good song that it changes everybody's mind about the burlesque house. They accept the fact that the burlesque house has a right to be there, and it's a part of history, and in the grand scheme of things, it's not really a negative smear on Springfield. Of course, it would have to have a humorous ending, so Marge gets there too late and accidentally destroys the burlesque house, and it ends with a funny ironic twist on Bart's predicament earlier, where now Marge has to work off her debt at La Maison Derrière. The major issue I have with this episode is 100% the clear standards and practices interference. If it was a brothel, then yes, Springfield's moral outrage would be more warranted. And I get why they couldn't do the brothel thing, I've mentioned it earlier, and it's very clear that the message they wanted to push in this episode is that sex work is okay. That an adult establishment like this isn't necessarily a bad thing. Like, nobody really knew the burlesque house even existed. The only negative drawback was that married men were going there. And yeah, I guess it would be a little extreme to have like Chief Wiggum banging out whores, but like even still, like it's a gentleman's club. And as it stands in the episode, the women at the burlesque house don't really do anything besides slightly imply that there may have been sex work going on through some pretty subtle jokes. Besides that, it's not like a seedy place with drug deals and happy endings going off all over the place. It is legitimately just a gentleman's club, which kind of dampens the overall message that this episode is trying to push. In terms of jokes, yeah, the episode has its funny moments, moments, but it's not really a blowout episode. It kind of just dumps all its funniest bits in the first half with the opening plot, and the rest of it is just making Marge out to be unlikable. And it goes for a cheap antagonist with the church crowd to get you on the side of Belle. Do I like this episode? I mean, it's not like a bad episode or anything, but it isn't particularly good either. It's not an episode that I would go out of my way to watch, and its merits and flaws are so neck and neck that it's just kind of another unremarkable season 8 episode. It's gimmicky, it's kind of boring, it really doesn't bring the laughs, but I can give some positives too. I think some of the storyboarding and animation is really good. The musical number is catchy, and when it does do something funny, it does something funny.
It's 11 o'clock. Do you know where your children are?
I told you last night. No! Where is Bart anyway? His dinner's getting all cold and eaten.
But it just feels kind of like a cheap, forgettable episode. Like, the best review I can give of this episode in one word is to say mid, and that's being really generous. If I had to rate Bart After Dark, I can't really give myself giving it more than a 5 out of 10. It is a true average episode, which any non-blowout episodes in Season 8 are probably going to float this score. That's why I really don't do Season 8 episodes unless it's like of personal interest to me, or if it's a top tier episode, which I've been trying to stay away from the top tier episodes as much as I can. It is a prime example of an episode I never go out of my way to watch. So yeah, I guess call this whole video a cop-out, but I really don't have much to say about the episode besides some of the thematic stuff I realized upon a rewatch. As a kid, it works a little bit better because we don't know what sex work really is. We just know that the burlesque house is a place of lewdness, but as an adult, when you realize that this was a clear stand-in for some sort of prostitution ring that may or may not have been dampened by standards and practices, the episode just seems really cheap and forgettable. Like, really the only thing it has going for it, aside from some of the jokes and the storyboarding, is the musical number at the end, and shocker, that musical number was submitted for and won an Emmy for Outstanding Music and Lyrics in a Comedy or Musical, half an hour or less. It seems like they just kind of wrote like a very average episode as an excuse to put in a pretty good musical number. And as a result, everything else in the episode is of minor importance. Like, they couldn't even get a real guest star to play Belle. It was literally just recurring voice actress Tress MacNeille, however her name's pronounced. Bart After Dark suffers from the Season 8 effect. What is the Season 8 effect? I kind of just made it up, but basically what it means is unless it's like one of the top tier episodes of the season, it's just kind of mid. What are your thoughts on Bart After Dark? Do you think they might have changed some stuff up in development? Do you think it's like just a very average episode that was made as an excuse to submit a musical number to the Academy? Let me know in the comments. And I think I'm probably just going to try to do the other 3 episodes that were in that poll at some point in the near future, but I do kind of want to take a little break from The Simpsons and Me and do some other videos. Nevertheless, I got a lot of Simpsons content on backlog, so if you haven't seen it all and you want to see my other videos, hit that subscribe button, like this video, and share me with your friends. I will see you next time. What the fuck is with Ralph and Martin being like just like there? That is such a weird character combination because like they're in the different grades. Ralph is mentally challenged and Martin is like an intellectual. That is such a bizarre pairing of characters, and like I don't think we ever see it again. I literally just like had to address this because like what?